I work this year with grade 11 and 12, so I feel really lucky to work with your team, so thank you guys for coming. We also have Nicole Giselle, who is the other adjustment counselor who works with grade 9 and 10 this year, and we rotate, so we stay with your child from grade 9 through 12 most of the time, so it's a real opportunity to build rapport and go from there. We also have Molly Boynton here, who is the Assistant Director of Student Support Services at Tufts University. We have Ricky Baum, who is
Hello.
a Winchester alum.
98.
1998, love that. Taylor Howe, Winchester alum. And Kristen Goff.
Yeah, you did it.
Thank you. Who is also a Winchester alum. They're going to share their stories. Today's goal is to walk away feeling like you have the tools, the strategies, the steps, the village surrounding you to support you and your teenager as they navigate through this process. The reason why we have found this program to be so helpful is because it's prevalent. Mental health is a prevalent issue. It impacts about 1 in 5 youth, and those numbers are trending on a national level, and we really want to be able to partner with you in this process, and we have found this program to be very helpful in that. So please don't hesitate. After today, continue the conversation with your teenagers. The grade 11 students will be getting this program. Grade 12 students got this program, a version of this program last year, and we've encouraged the seniors to attend it again because it might feel different, it might sit different. So even if they had it last year and didn't attend today at 2 o'clock during WIN, still have those conversations, and we will continue to have those conversations. Have those conversations with us here at the school. Again, we want to partner with you. I'm going to pause because I can talk all day. I want to thank the Coalition for Safer Community for being here and partnering with us. They always do. Thank you, Dot. Thank you, Maura. And we'll get some food and then we'll get started.
All right.
Okay? All right, go.
Sounds good. Oh, it's an honor to be here today. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my story, my struggles as a teenager with alcoholism, and I'll keep it, I'll move through it pretty quickly, and but also what led to me getting sober young. And my experience, I grew up here in Winchester. I have a good mom and dad. I grew up playing sports. I was a gymnast and soccer player. Soccer became my main sport. And when I was in middle school, I had started dabbling with, smoking. I had 2 older brothers. One of the older brothers, his friends were always around, and I had stolen a bunch of beers from my dad and brought them over to a friend's house, and we were in her bedroom. We're like, okay, we're gonna drink. And we open the beers and we start drinking, and we hear her mother coming up the stairs. And my first thought was, chug it, don't waste it. And then I had this reaction to having alcohol in my system that was different than some of the other people that I was with. And theirs was throw it out, get rid of it. And about, I would say, probably 6 or 7 months later, it was the summer before my freshman year of high school, and I had been invited to come and play with the varsity soccer team. And so I was at home with my dad, who was working, and I went downstairs to our kitchen. My dad was a drinker, a really good dad. Both my parents are amazing. But I had gone downstairs and gotten into his liquor cabinet, and I sat on my kitchen floor, and I got drunk by myself with Beefeater dry gin. And I remember having this immediate feeling of relief in my system. It was thank God, I just found what I needed to get through the rest of my life, is what that feeling was at that time. And I ended up making varsity as a freshman, which was kind of a big deal back then. I think the team is still really good. And and I continued to drink. My goal became, to get drunk as often as possible, and it consumed me. And I was a good soccer player. I continued to excel. I was not a great student. I don't remember a whole lot of intervention. I think it's so great what you guys are doing now because I don't remember, or I just didn't reach out for that support. And being a good athlete kind of kept people off my back, my parents included. It was like, is she just living the way normal high school kids live? And is this kind of drinking and partying normal? And by the time I was towards the end of my sophomore year, it was really bad. Every time I drank, I blacked out. I would go home from a party and I would continue drinking in my bathtub. And my parents didn't know all of that, but they started to think this is not normal. Like something's not okay. And I started being grounded all the time, and I would say, I don't care, and I would just leave. And then again, being a very competitive athlete, it kept me from getting in more and more trouble. And when I was a junior, I had a friend, I had started doing drugs, like doing ecstasy and dabbling with drugs that would, for me, it was mainly what would help me drink more and curb the blackouts that I was having. And a friend had written me a letter telling me that she was worried about me. And my parents ended up finding the letter. And that started to change how they were viewing it. Maybe this is not just normal. I mean, I've come to look back and say none of what was happening around us was normal. Even people who were not technically, clinically alcoholics, our behavior was insane and dangerous. And they never made it comfortable the way that I was living, which I'm so grateful for today. We were fighting all the time. I was a nightmare. My mother, when I finally came to her and said, I think I'm an alcoholic, she said, thank God. I thought you needed an exorcism. So she would laugh about that today, but it was not funny then. And when I started openly at 17, 18 years old saying, I think I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't really know what that meant. That had never been explained to me. When I think of what would have been helpful for my parents to know and what would have been helpful for me to have known back then is what really makes someone an alcoholic. You have problem drinkers, and I don't condone that at all. I have a lot of reasons why I wish that whole culture was different. But for me, every time I drank, I could not stop. And any time I wasn't drinking, I was consumed by it. It was the only thing that I could think about. And it's those two things that in recovery you learn are things that are never going to be different. I am never going to be able to sip a glass of wine and push it aside and be done. I'm not built like that. And that is a thing. And you're an alcoholic whether you're 13 or 60 and thrown your life away to it. And when I went, I had been recruited to a lot of different D1 schools, and I said, nope, I'd rather drink, I'd rather party. My parents at that point were so overwhelmed. They sent me to a counselor at one point who I refused to talk to, but life at home was very uncomfortable. And when I left, I ended up going to Virginia to school and playing D3 soccer, and I thought, I want to play D3 and I want more time to drink and party. And I left for college. My mom felt a combination of relief that I was out of the house and was scared to death that I was going to die. And I would very often wake up covered in vomit. And once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. I was still excelling at soccer, and I was popular. I had friends, but I was a mess. It was a complete mess. And halfway through the year, I came home and said to my parents, I'm going to get better. They're like, okay, well, you probably cannot do this by yourself. And I said, let me try. I'm going to get better. Watch me. Like, okay. So I go back to school, and at that point, for about a year, I had tried to say, I think I just need to not drink vodka. I think I need to just drink wine. And I tried to mix and drink with control, and it never worked. And by the time I came home from college, I had flunked out. I had a .9 GPA. My mother said, "How did you do that?" I said, "It was actually pretty easy. I just never showed up for anything except for soccer." And my soccer coach had pulled some strings and gotten me into summer school. And they said, if you go to summer school and you get your grades up and you go to class, you can come back. And my plan was exactly that. I am going to get my life together. I'm going to train for the season next year. I'm really going to make my parents proud. Well, the end of that month, I did go to class and I did get my grades up. But I went on a 3-day bender, and all of my efforts to get better by myself and control my drinking and control my environment and focus on sports failed miserably. And right before I came home, after 3 days of drinking and doing cocaine, I wasn't feeling well, and I went into the dormitory bathroom to fill my hands with water. And the last thing I remember is leaning down to take a drink of water, and I woke up face down on the bathroom floor. I cut my head open, and I was covered in blood and vomit, and I couldn't move my body. And for the first time since that drink that I took on my kitchen floor at 14 years old, I stood up and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my eyes were yellow. I was puffy. There was nothing there, and it scared me. And I thought, I've got to get better. What ended up happening is I came home, and same thing. I said, I'm really done. I've hit bottom. And I spent 2 more weeks continuing to drink. And I couldn't stop. I was like, I'm still going to hang out. I'm still going to go party. I'm 19 years old. What am I going to do for the rest of my life? And what am I ever going to look forward to? And my mom had been talking to her best friend who had been in recovery at that point. Now it's been 60-something years. But he was like another dad to me growing up. And he said, you can't help her up, but you can certainly help her down. You kick her out of the house. You tell her she has a choice. She can go to rehab. She can go stay with my daughter, Sarah, who's sober, or she can be on the streets. If she wants to live like an alcoholic, she doesn't get to experience all of the comforts of this nice home and 3 meals a day and the love of her mom and dad. And they kicked me out. And I got drunk that night. That was July 15th, 2003. The morning of July 16th, I was on a train to Brooklyn to stay with a friend of mine who'd been in recovery at the time for 2 years. And this July 16th will mark 23 years of sobriety. Mm-hmm. And so that July, it makes me cry every time I say it. But that drink was the last drink that I had. And I remember thinking my choices are, I can drink and I can die, or I can have my whole life ahead of me. And at 19 years old, that was a hard choice for me to make. And there was a part of me that thought, I just want to feel this relief. And I didn't know any other way to live. I didn't know how to cope with, I thought, well, I drink because I'd been through all these things. It's like people have been through far worse and they're not blacking out every day. It was really learning about how my brain worked and what it really meant to be an alcoholic. And my parents helped to save my life. And my mom said, that day that you left, I didn't know if we would ever see you again. And she was told, and I have since told many parents this whose kids struggle with addiction, there's no formula that if you use tough love or if you kick your kid out because they're living this way, that they are definitely going to get better. We've all lost a lot of friends over the years. And but if you don't do anything and you frame it as normal behavior and you don't step in and you make their life comfortable, it's almost a guarantee that they will not get better. And in 22 plus years, I have never heard the story of things are going really well. I'm a really good student, really good athlete. My parents are not upset with me, but I just thought I wanted to stop drinking and stop doing drugs. It's everyone's bottom looks very different, but the consequences that my parents, having consequences to my behavior, helped me get sober at 19 years old. And I've had a beautiful life. I own a business. I have a beautiful family. My husband's back there. We have an 8-year-old daughter and dogs, and my mom lives with us today, and we've been best friends since I was 19 years old. I also got to share many years of sobriety with my father, who I said the same thing to, and said, if you don't get sober, Mom and I are leaving. And he got sober 2 years after I did. And so those blessings that I didn't think about as a teenager that came, we lost my dad 2 years ago, and I got to return that gift of unconditional love and tough love and believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, and taking that chance. And when I said goodbye to him, I knew that he wasn't worried about me. And that was such a blessing to give my mom and dad, because they spent years scared that they were never going to see me again. And there were many, many times that almost came true. So I think it's such a blessing sitting up here with my two best friends of many, many years. And all three of us have, different stories and different histories, but we are all raising our families sober. And our kids, God willing, will never see us drunk or high. And we get to do, this and try to give back and help. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm gonna pass it off to my best friend here.
I'm a little nervous. Good job. I'm a little nervous. I've never really talked about this. I honestly never thought I'd come back to Winchester. Just because of experiences I had throughout my life. And I moved here when I was 12 years old in the 5th grade, so a little bit later. But what formed me were the years before that. So I grew up the oldest of 9, as poor as you can grow up in America, Section 8, welfare, all that. I don't know how my mother found a Section 8 house in Winchester, but she did, and it was a great place to go to middle school and high school. But the formative years before that are really what imprinted on me. And Taylor was talking about it a little bit. Her parents had accountability, which was great. Mine didn't. My mother had me at 16, had 9 kids by the time she was 28. So it was chaos all the time. And we grew up in a bad environment. My father was an alcoholic, drug addict, a lot of domestic violence. Police there all the time. And we saw that from a young age. And when you grow up in a house like that, you're going to be, I realize it now, then I didn't, you're going to tend to be violent. And I fought a lot as a youth. And a lot of things happened. And my mom was really, it imprinted on me quite a bit. My mother was beat up a lot by my dad, and he ended up going to jail. And that really affected me quite a bit. But it also affected me. I started drinking at a later age. I was 16, as opposed to Taylor at 12 or 13. I was 16 years old. So I was like, I'm never going to be like him. It's never going to happen. There's no way that's ever going to happen. And 16, the second I took a sip, that was it. From 16, never drinking. I was drinking every weekend. Then I went to smoking weed. I know weed's legal now, but it still is the gateway drug, because that's the first time that introduced me to drugs, and then the cycle just went from there. Okay, I don't drink. I only drink on the weekends, but at school I'm smoking a little weed, so I can still feel that. It became to the point where I needed to have something in my system to feel comfortable, to even have a good time, and to just get through every day, which went from nothing at 16 to 17, full out. I was 0 to 60 as fast as I could go. And it accelerated pretty quickly from there. And the whole thing of always fighting, and, you know, I was fiercely loyal, but also I had that side because you're in an environment where that's just the normal. In Winchester, that's not the normal. That's why it was great to grow up here, but the groundwork for that was already laid in place for me. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I did graduate high school. It's 98. A year after high school, someone came to my house, and I think this is an important part of sort of what shaped me, is someone came to my house, it was a girl, said that someone had put her hands on her at a party, and I lost it. Me and 3 guys went to this party, 19 years old, 10 months after high school. I always knew college wasn't going to be for me. I'm a carpenter now. Thank God I found what I'm good at. But this is before that phase. I was still like post-high school trying to figure it out. And, you know, went in there and it was a mistake, but people got hurt. It was a fight, a party full of guys. I ended up going to jail from there, 2 years in jail at 19 years old. And that is a scary thing, because you're definitely, it's a different environment. You go from Winchester into jail, and it was, I would like to say it was a wake-up call. It wasn't. It was just like, you're just in this now. And I was in there for 2 years, but that was a plea deal that was taken. Now, like I said, there was a fight, people got hurt, and I'm thankful for the chance that I got a second chance. But it was still, the beginning of it was, the offers were like 5 to 7 years. And as a 19-year-old kid, like, my knees buckled a little. I'm like, oh God. I'm like doing the math. I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna be 27. And it was, I still look back on it now and I don't understand how this didn't straighten me out. But a lot of times it doesn't. When people end up in jail, it just keeps going and it keeps pressing forward. And that was a big deal around here, because trust me, it was in all the papers. This was in 1999. So it was a big deal, and I was ashamed of it. And that's why even coming here today talking about it, I thought it was important, because I have a 18-year-old son, freshman in college. I have a 13-year-old. So I would have never came here, but she asked me, and I was like, I'm going through what you guys are going through, but I feel like I have a little insight into it, and they have younger kids, and they're about to go through what I'm going through, but it's stressful for you guys, and it's a lot. So I figured after that 2 years when I got out, I'm going to be great. I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to do anything. Got out. It was like a lease on life. Thank God I only fought 4 or 5 times in jail. Luckily, it wasn't too bad, but it's a tough environment. And that lasted about 2 weeks. And then I started drinking. And I hadn't done a lot. It was like weed before I went to jail, but then it was like, all right, well, I can drink and I can do some cocaine, and that's going to keep me able to drink longer. It was just a cycle, and you trade in one thing for another, and it's just sort of a cycle that keeps going. But I could always justify it, well, I'm not as bad as this person, so I guess it's all right, because I'm not, what's rock bottom? And I also had, and I think this is important to say, a 2.5-year sentence on probation for 5 years hanging over my head. But in my mind, I couldn't not drink. So if I got in trouble, I was going back to jail for 2.5 years. And those consequences didn't matter. I just felt that, I'm going to do this. And I couldn't control it. And that's something that's important. Like, if you really have that in you, no matter what you do, it has to come from you. Anyone from the outside, you can be there, you can hold consequences, you can do whatever you need to do, but at some point it's got to come from them, and you can be the support and the consequences in it. And I went through, luckily got through probation that 5 years. I don't know how I did it, because I was heavily drinking cocaine. I think at 24 it was, and I was partying all weekend. Started drinking. I never drank when I had to work, so I was very high functioning. I held a job, you wouldn't think so, Monday through Friday, 40 to 60 hours a week as a carpenter working, And then Friday hit and it was go. The drive home from work, alcohol, cocaine. This one weekend, going all day into Saturday, Sunday, and I tried crystal meth for the first time. And it was just something that wasn't a big deal at that point. It was like, all right, I did this, I'm gonna do that. Well, sometime that Sunday, I realized like I was shaking, something was going wrong, and my cousin, who lived with me at the time, I looked at him, it's the last thing I remember. I said, is something wrong? He's like, yeah. And we got in the car, I passed out on the way to Leahy Hospital, and I woke up from a coma, I think it was a month, 5 weeks later. So, like, they told my mother, these two were there. They told my mother to call everyone, basically told her I was gonna die. And I don't really remember any of this part. The struggle for them, and a lot of times, it's on the family. These guys are the ones that struggle. I just woke up 5 weeks later. They didn't know if I was gonna be alive or not. And I was in the hospital for 3 months. I had tubes in me, like I said, in a coma for that whole time. Couldn't walk 2 steps, had to reteach myself to walk. That was a 5-6 month process, you know, walking around the block, little steps here and there. And again, the reason I'm bringing all these things up is because it was always that, you know, I'm done. There's no way. If I do this, the doctors looked at me as I left the hospital. And thank God for these doctors, amazing what they do. And they didn't turn me away, you know, they helped me and got me through this and saved my life. But they said, if you do it again, you're gonna die. So for 8 months, I was white knuckling it. No real help, but you think you're sober, you're not. You're just white knuckling it, I'm gonna be fine. And I ended up 8 months, I was like, oh, I got this figured out, I'm done. It's never gonna happen again. And I ended up, same thing, always starts with the first drink of alcohol, but then it spirals for me into whatever drugs. And from that point, it was off to the races again. And that was for many, many years. And these two would have interventions when I would go out to Colorado. They'd sit me down and have the long talk, and you know, I'd listen, and we'd shed some tears, and I'd think, you know, this is right. They're like, we don't want to lose you, we don't want this. But I never had to care for myself to actually follow through with it, but the people around me are the ones that cared the most. And having that support, like my mother never put consequences, but she was also 16 years old. She was a child raising children. So she never was able to do that, but having support system through these two, through my wife, who's back there, she was a big support system. But I spent many, many years, and she was talking about her bottom, and when she mentioned that, I felt it was important, because she said that everyone's bottom looks different. My bottom was, I'm gonna back up a little bit. Living in Winchester, I grew up in poverty, but when I came here, it was amazing. But I always strived to get to that point. I wanted to come out of poverty, all of this. So my bottom for me was, my wife's a lawyer. We had like this house in Milford. Our boys were very little, but I had stopped drinking. The cocaine at that point was done, but now I'm taking Percocets, because that's more easy to function. You know, that's the thing. It's no big deal. It's just a couple perks. Well, it turns into a couple more, and it's just the same thing. It's just a cycle that's going around and around and around. And I was we owned a house in Milford. We bought a lake house right on the water in Newfound Lake. So I thought, I've made this life. This is what's gonna make me happy. This is what's gonna solve it. And you were up there, and I was sitting out. My bottom was looking at the lake on the water, beautiful day in July. And I was like, I can't do it. I was crying, she was crying, my wife, they were holding me. And I called Taylor, and I said, I can't do it anymore, I'm coming. And I had somewhere to go. I think that's important too. If someone's struggling, you need to get them out of the environment. I know it's like, oh, they're gonna be fine, we're gonna send them here, they're gonna talk to this person. Get them out of the environment for a little while. She went to New York, I went to her house with her and her amazing husband for 3 weeks. She was 6 months pregnant, huge. And we sat there. She was,
Thanks for adding that.
yeah, biggest I've ever seen you. And I ended up going out there, and she sat with me every day, and we would talk, we would cry. I was like just beside myself with what, like, is this going to be what it is? This is horrible. If I have to feel all these feelings and try to talk through this, I don't know if I want this. But I stayed there for 3 weeks, and I'll never forget what you said when we were at the lake. She looked at me, the biggest smile as I'm crying. I'm so happy that this is happening. I'm like, this is horrible. This is the worst day of my life. And she's happy that it's happening. But in that, now looking back, I know why she was happy. She saw the signs of what was about to happen. Now, I went there for 3 weeks, came back. Taylor used to tell me, as you're driving by and you want to stop or you want to do something, close your eyes. I'm not going to do this. And I would do that. I'm not going to do this today. I'm not going to do this. It sounds stupid, but I would do that. And it went about a month and a half, like 3 months. But after a month, my wife was diagnosed with MS. So it was like, this was getting put to the test. I'm newly sober, and I gritted my teeth, went through it, and she was in the hospital for 3 months, in a wheelchair for 6 months. Mm-hmm. She's much, much better now. But after a couple months of that, I'm like, I can't do it anymore. And I started using for 1 month. And then I looked at myself in the mirror, and this is the last time, December, I think it was 9-10 years ago. I don't know, but I know it was December because you were getting married. So it was around that time. And that was the last time. Because I looked in the mirror and I said, I'm going to let her down, I'm going to let my boys down, I'm going to let myself down. And that was the last time that I did it, and I'm thankful for it. But I wanted to give you that part of the story, but I also wanted to talk to you about, because my son is a freshman in college, and this is like the stressful part for the parents. So I started talking to them years ago about alcohol, drugs are horrible, you can't do them. Because I was sober, you can't do it. It was almost like putting the fear into them. But then my older one's freshman year of high school, my younger one, my wife's a responsible person. I don't know why she's still with me. I can't figure it out. But she drinks responsibly. She'll go out, have a few drinks with her girlfriends, have a good time, come back. My little one, and my freshman in high school at the time, so the younger one was 3rd grade, whatever, would look at her, and they would be like, Mommy, you're drunk. And it was almost like I demonized her. Mm. So I had to, as a parent, readjust what I was saying. Because, what I'm telling them is the wrong thing. Because I almost made it like there was something wrong with her when really there was something wrong with me. So I had a different conversation, and it was a great thing that it happened, but at the moment I felt horrible that this is what was going on. So I had to sit them down and say, Mama drinks responsible. I don't drink because I can't, and I can't stop. Now, they were younger, so I didn't give them the full talk, but throughout the years we had that. But that was a very important step in it, because if you always demonize it and say it's going to happen no matter what, but we also have to realize that and try to work that into the conversation. Mm-hmm. Around that time, I always lean on these two. I started talking to Taylor and Kristen, and Taylor said something to me that I say to my boys all the time. How do you know you have a problem or you're an alcoholic? And I was like stressing about this so much. And I said, if you start to drink and you can't stop, and it's all you think about, and you need to do it to have fun, and you can no longer have fun, well, you have a problem. And you need to find someone, and you need to talk to me, you need to talk to Mama, you need to find someone and talk to them. And, I think they heard me, they were younger. And I've had that conversation with my older son, because especially around junior year, he still hadn't drank, so he had that healthy fear of it. But I also knew he was going to drink at some point, so having those conversations with him, and the conversation was always, I thought I was getting through. I didn't know, though. He was a very good athlete, so he was fully focused on sports. He started in varsity as an 8th grader for a wrestling team, and he wrestles in college now. So I didn't know when it would shift, and it it didn't so far, but I always worry about it because it's always in the back of my mind. What's going to happen when he goes to college? And we would continue to have the conversations about what he needs to do. And I didn't tell him my whole backstory. It was just like, you know, these few things have happened. This is why I don't drink, because I have a problem. But he said something his junior year, and like all I said, all his friends are wrestlers. He's like, well, if I ever, you know, we're wrestlers. If I'm in college and I get in trouble and I have to get in a fight, I can handle myself. And he didn't think there was any consequences. And I was like, oh, I talked to my wife. I'm like, I need to tell him more about myself before he goes. So I sat down. I was so nervous. And I told him everything. I left out a few things, you know, maybe not the crystal meth, but, you know, we talked about everything. But I talked to him about most of what I just told you, and about going to jail, about being in a fight. And I was so nervous. More as a parent, I was nervous, like ashamed of myself. How's he going to view me? And we have this guilt when something happens wrong with our kid. It's at least for me, oh, it's my fault. They're not doing this, so it's got to be me. And I just wanted him to know this is why I'm telling him this, and this is how he has to look at it. And I'll never forget, I looked at him and I was like, so do you understand? How do you feel about this? I was waiting for him to tell me how ashamed he was of me and how embarrassed. And he goes, I'm not really that surprised. And I was like, that surprised me. And I was like, why not? He's like, well, I know you don't drink. And every time we're at like one of the relatives' house and people start drinking a little bit, like the aunts and uncles, they're always like, well, your dad's really, really crazy. And then I'm like, all right, stop, don't talk anymore. But so I think he knew. He didn't know, obviously, all that I was going to tell him. There was no way he knew that. But it was a great conversation. And then, you know, that was it. And he understood. And, you know, he ended up going to college this past year. And the best part of that is when he just came home, he came to me and said, we know he drank a couple times in high school, but he came to me and said, you know, I drank for the first time after the wrestling season. So we talked about it, and we talked about how some of his friends they have to drink to have fun. And I'm like, well, we've talked about this. You know, if you start to do that, you need to have a conversation. If it's not with it's with Mama, or find someone like Taylor or Kristen to have a conversation with. And it can be one or the other. My younger son, I know my older one will come to me. At least I think that now after he just did that. My younger one's going to go to my wife, I'm pretty sure. He's a mama's boy, and I can see that. And that's okay. And even if it doesn't come to one of the parents, if he goes to one of these counselors or has someone to go to, or these two friends that I bounced stuff off of for decades, it's very important. And I think if I would have told him that, just gone the other way and told him, if you do this, you're grounded for 3 months, I think he probably wouldn't want to come to me with that stuff. So I think it was an important part of it. But every kid's different, because my 13-year-old, he scares me because he reminds me a little more of myself. So I think I'm going to have the conversations with him a lot more than my older son, and that's just me with my fears and what I can see in him. And that's it for me, I think.
Hi, everyone. I am Kristen Goff, like she had introduced us earlier, but I just wanted to start off and kind of I'm going to kind of frame my story a little bit differently than these guys. I am a mental health counselor, and I've been working with adolescents for almost 20 years, and I am obsessed with that age range, and I love them, and I'm really intrigued by their brains. And so I've done a ton of thinking about my adolescent brain, and I did a lot of counseling when I was young, and I try to say that to kind of appeal to this audience a little bit differently, because I have a similar but very different story with some other kind of shock factors. But I wanted to kind of frame this in a way that I like to think about things in regards to like resiliency and risk factors, and like what kind of outcomes come from those things, with my personal story attached to it. So I think it's important to note, I mean, Winchester is a wonderful, really safe place to bring up your kids. And that's like number one, like a really good baseline and a good foundation for folks. but it doesn't protect you from everything. And so I say that to say I'm the youngest of 5. I have an incredibly loving family. I have good relationships with all of my siblings. My parents were they were around, they worked a ton, never scared to like ask us questions or see what was going on with us or be there for us in any way. And I say that to say that I still really struggled when I was an adolescent. And that is, for me, took a long time of soul searching to understand, and I get a little emotional just because it's hard to kind of put that out there for people. Even though I've done it for a really long time, like in little bits and pieces, it's hard to do it in like a group setting, so thanks, bear with me. But when I was 11, I started smoking weed, and I really couple that with finding my group of friends when I was in middle school, which includes some of these people here. And for me, I think my biggest risk factor was I had a really negative or a really poor self-concept. My drive became like proving myself. The loyalty to my friends, and like there is like peer pressure, but nobody really ever pressured me to do anything. I wanted to show up for people in a different way. That might be because I was the youngest child and I'm like attention seeking in some ways, but I also like it really like it hit home for me a lot later. Obviously I didn't know what was going on then, but on the outside I appeared really okay. I was super high functioning. I was very much, like I said, like very loving, outgoing. I didn't have a problem talking to people. I wasn't something but I just wasn't aware. I think that's like the biggest thing, is that this isn't something that I really understood until I was much older. Actually, really until there was crisis, right? So at 11, I was smoking weed. By 14 and 15, I was smoking weed every single day, and I was drinking every weekend, but also like doing really risky things, stealing, fighting, skipping school to go beat people up in other towns, like in 8th grade, like getting chased by police for, like there was, and it like escalated so quickly. But I also had this very weird sense of like making sure that I had a little manipulative side, that like I was able to like coach my parents that I was okay, right? Like I was like savvy enough to know I'm not going to scare the crap out of you, so that I can still maintain my freedom on this other side, because I was enjoying it. The risks felt really good. In the adolescent brain, like that, it's the perfect science to have some really not okay things happen, and that can be the adrenaline. It could be, showing up or being like that person for your friends, right? Like I think for me, a lot of that like gave me a little like badge of honor, right? I grew up with a lot of structure and a lot of support, and a lot of my friends didn't, and so like that almost created a narrative or a dynamic for me where I kind of had to prove myself in some ways. And so like I really became like that guy, right? I would do all the things that nobody else, like with sorry, he smiles because I broke my leg doing something like that at one point. But like anyone was like, jump out this 2nd story window onto this trampoline. It's gonna be so fun. I was like, okay, I was already out the window and I broke my leg, right? It's like it could be something as simple as that. But I just didn't, the lack of forethought, right? Not having that frontal lobe at all, trying to like look good for your peers, some peer pressure, I think, not so like intense, but, and just like really not thinking about who I was. I feel like where that kind of became a breeding ground for my own mental health and my own substance use was the self-concept piece, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to have meaning for that piece. It was like, it was a very apparent void for me. And I was always trying to fill that void with all these other things. So however that looked, it could have been risky behavior or substance use. I just kind of kept going. And so I was I was dealing with substance use, drinking all the time, using drugs, hard drugs by the time I was 14 and 15, every single weekend. But I also always got good grades. I always worked. I always showed up for practice. Whatever my parents wanted, it happened. I really made sure that layer was always intact. I was an above average student. I had never failed a class in my entire grades. But at the same time, I'm getting like chased out of the parking lot for smoking. I'm getting caught in the bathroom, fighting. I had, by the end of sophomore year, I think Winchester High had enough of me, and kind of really put me in a category that I didn't feel good in either. That was like another thing that didn't help my overall well-being, and no disrespect to anybody's efforts. I think it was much more the lack of supports at that time. It was much more, people were like, you're doing bad stuff, you're doing bad stuff. I also had really, really high achieving and really like, my older brother and sister were very high achievers and also had really good like sports careers too. So like it looked really weird for me as the one in the family that didn't have those things. So I don't know, it got turned against me as opposed to like, oh, maybe she needs some help, right? So it was a lot more like, stop doing this stuff, or like the kind of talk down as opposed to let me see what's going on, how I can lift you up. And so that was very real for me. And I didn't see myself, I was getting turned away for extra help at school. I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom during class time because everyone's like, you're just gonna go smoke anyways. And like, that didn't feel good to me. So I called it quits on Winchester High, and my mom supported that. And I went to private school, I went to Austin Prep. But even though I kind of had like a fresh start, it just helped me kind of create that mask. And I thrived there. I did really well, but I was still like really escalating in my risky behavior on the back end. I think probably the pinnacle was the summer before my senior year. I had been really involved with some gang members, and I kind of really went left. And so that seems like a stretch, but if you knew like my progression, I also had friends that had been in DYS. I had friends that were incarcerated that I would visit. I had like a lot of touch points with different kinds of systems in that sense. So it didn't just go from like point A to point B. There was like a progression in that sense, but it was a little bit more desensitized in my life or normalized in my life. Like that was not as scary as I think people think it to be. And so I just kind of had gravitated towards a different crowd because that kind of behavior felt normal to me. And that was really where I was able to kind of be my risky self without a lot of backlash, and everybody else was doing it, right? And so like it wasn't a weird thing in that sense. But again, like I don't think my mom ever knew. She knew about it, but in a sense of like not all of it. Let's say that. Because I was not dumb enough to tell her everything. That would have been crazy. She would have been like, what? This is crazy. So the summer before my senior year, I was caught and charged with 7 counts of armed robbery and a gun charge, and was arrested, and it was one of the biggest turning points of my life, sitting in Framingham State Prison, looking out 8 inches of plexiglass into a barbed wire fenced-in yard. And I said to myself, this is not my life. This is not it. Because I can keep doing what I'm doing and go this way, or I can make a real, real strong pivot and go this way. And so that decision was really clear for me, and that path was really clear for me. And I was very committed to it. I spent the entirety of my senior year going to court every month. It took about a year to resolve my court case, and I ended up being able to walk away with 5 years of probation and 800 hours of community service. And I had a lot of time, a suspended sentence hanging over my head. I could have done 21 years in prison for that charge, or just for the armed robbery charge, let alone the gun charge. So that was a huge privilege that my family brought to me, and the color of my skin. I mean, to be really honest about that, because my black and brown co-defendants did not get granted bail, and they did serve time for that charge. So I do want to say that openly. That's something that sits with me very heavily. But given that opportunity, I very much sunk my teeth into it and really saw it as like, oh, I have this new ability to like turn my life around, and I definitely stuck to it, but I don't think I had the tools or the understanding about how to do that in a way that made me heal. And so it took years of counseling, but I went to college. I still drank. I still did drugs. I excelled in college. I worked. I did all the things that college kids do. And I was just a little bit smarter about it. I knew when it was getting hairy, you would see me, I would be missing. If there was anything, like I smelled the wind blow in the wrong direction, I was gone. But I was still there, and I was still really like trying to fill that hole. I still had that gaping void that I didn't know what it was or how to deal with it. And so even though I was very intellectually smart, I still like emotionally didn't understand myself enough to see what that was going to be like for me, or like to make any real changes. The patterns kind of kept on. So I stayed out of trouble, but I still kind of, my risky behavior was a little bit more managed. It was more like the substances started to creep in a little bit in a different way. So that's kind of was how college meandered. And then into my adult life, I ended up, right when I got out of college, I worked for the Department of Youth Services as a staff, and I really felt like I found my place. I really definitely had a passion for working with youth who were involved, system impacted youth, and felt like this was kind of my calling in a sense. And that was, it really helped to kind of start fill that void a little bit. I had a passion, I had a direction, I had meaning, but then I was working Monday through Friday and then doing the same old grind that everybody does, like waiting for the weekend just to kind of let loose. And I didn't let loose very easily. It was kind of a really hard Friday through Sunday, and then picking up the pieces till like Wednesday, not waiting for the weekend to come again for Friday. So I knew there was still something wrong. Not wrong, but something that wasn't sorted out in my journey. And so it took a long time, like I said, but with counseling, with support, with my friends at my side. About 28 years old, I was really done. I was really done disconnecting from myself all the time and trying to reconnect to something I wasn't sure that was there. And I called it a quits. I was a very high functioning drug and alcohol abuser. I think I had a little bit more control over it than my counterparts over here, in a sense that like I feel like I could pause when I needed to, but it was an intellectual pause rather than like this is good for me kind of pause, right? It was more like I learned my lesson of like, I know this is going to get me in trouble, so A plus B equals C. And so that just didn't work anymore. And so it really, for me, it had to be sobriety for me to kind of stop filling that gap so that I could start to fill it up with me, and understand who I was. And it took me until I was about 28 years old. But I did it, and we're here. And I think for everything in this room, if it's helpful in regards to parents, that there can be just one really impactful risk factor. It doesn't have to, you can raise really resilient young people, but realistically, it doesn't mean that they're not going to struggle in one way or another. And a lot of it is really hidden. And some of that, they're never going to tell you everything. You're their parents. It's just, they're never going to out themselves completely. And so what was so helpful that my parents did was they got me help. I really, if I didn't go to counseling, or if I didn't start to have a journey that like really started to look at who I was and how I was showing up in this world, I would never know that there was a void that I was trying to fill. I couldn't sit here and literally look at all of you and say that I didn't feel good about myself, and I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do or what I was meant to do in this world until I stopped filling that gap with all these things that had worked for so long. And when that stopped, it was hard. And it was ugly, but it was super healing. And that was something I couldn't have done by myself. So just know that you can show up and be the best parents possible all the time, but you may need help from somebody else at some point too. It's just sometimes it's not always possible to get the whole message in, because people just aren't ready, you know? They say the adolescent brain, or your brain doesn't fully develop from 20 till you're 25 to 30. So realistically, sometimes it's time too. You just got to kind of give it your all and show up, and like Ricky said, just kind of create an environment where people will talk to you, because the more you kind of shut it down, that you're going to push away more, and then you can't even get them the help that they need either. So thank you for hearing my story.
So really, as I was listening to Ricky and Taylor and Kristen reflect on kind of their trajectories of things, I heard lots of, like you may have seen me like writing things down, because what I'm hearing about and what I think all three of you guys touched base on so clearly was the lots of moments and lots of points for learning. And the biggest thing that I talk about with students, so I can briefly, I'll just share really quickly, my role really is not as a clinician, and it's not, even though in our role, some of us are trained as a clinician, and my background is in adjustment counseling. Really what we are is we're educators, and I think as parents, you sit in that role too. You've been educating your children for years and years, and that job doesn't stop after they graduate high school. And so I really liked hearing about the moments where you were learning from each other, you were learning from yourself, you were learning from your experiences, and really just as your children are about to go out and learn all sorts of new things in coding and computer science and English and engineering, whatever it is, they're also going to be learning so much about their brains and so much about their friendships and so much about themselves. And so that lesson that we expect high schoolers to know by graduation is like how to ask for help, where to go to with certain questions, how to access certain resources. They don't know sometimes, and that's okay. So I think that's what I want to just share with you, is that a lot of times to the institutions that they may be setting out to attend, or the worlds that they're even within their job opportunities and their social circles and their community organizations, there are places where they can get support around how to learn how to ask for help. I'm also happy to stay on for a little bit to talk specifically about what student support looks like. Again, my role is one that really didn't exist 10 years ago, but is really present in, like I said, many different places now. Our job is we reach out to students anytime we get any word that they are navigating any sort of challenge. So academically, financially, health, both mental health, physical health, personally, socially, we will float them. We get lots of input from lots of different places, and we'll reach out and we'll say, hey, I hear you're not attending class, or I hear that you are eating by yourself in the dining hall, or I hear, which sometimes is okay and on purpose, but we are eyes and ears to check in with them. It's up to them on if they'd like to engage, but then our job is to help connect them to resources and help decision make and be a thought partner around how they might want to navigate things. And it's really up to them, but it's honoring the learning moments along the way.
I just want to say thank you for sharing, because your stories, I think what really is impactful is hearing real life stories. I'm an outreach coordinator for the town of Reading, so I teach teen mental health, substance abuse in the high school, and I think it's super crucial. I also grew up very young. I started drinking, and I was a 911 operator for 12 years. Even through that job, obviously stressful day you drink, you're happy you drink. We come from a culture where drinking is everything, especially in Massachusetts. It's all
So true.
kind of what it is. But as I transitioned from that role into what I do now is teaching teen mental health and substance misuse in the high school, I think back to when I was growing up, how that wasn't taught to us at all, right? So I'm wondering if growing up in Winchester, did you guys have that education? If so, do you think it would have, not obviously have been oh my God, don't mind me talking about DEAR program, because that's doesn't work. But I'm talking more education behind, you were talking about, the brain. I'm super fascinated with the brain now. And I know their frontal lobes aren't developed, so obviously we're thinking even a year ahead that's not even in their radar. But do you think teaching, and at what age do you think it's appropriate to start these conversations? Because I struggle with that in Reading. I'm just getting now to the 9th graders, which I think is, in my opinion, already too late.
It
I
is.
teach the teen mental health in 11th grade, and I've been fighting to get it younger in the ninth grade, and finally I got the green light to teach teen mental health, because I think not a lot of kids turn to substance use because they don't know or understand what is really happening. So they're coping with substances to numb it, right? And right now in the town, I'm fighting to get into the middle school, because I think having these conversations between 7th and 8th grade is crucial. But I get the pushback because parents, again, no judgment to the parents, but I get pushback a lot because administration says like, oh, we don't want, these taught to our kids, and I think in a lot of the minds of parents, they think that their kids don't know, but what I'm trying to fight is these kids have this, right? Phones, TikTok alone, Snapchat alone. They're learning way more things that you think they already know. So hearing from you, do you think having some sort of education when you were in school, would have that been helpful for you?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, and not the parents, I think Taylor talked about, the parents can recognize it, but I think you have to recognize it, and that's hard to figure out at any age. I didn't recognize it till I was in my 30s. So we're talking about having to have them figure this out, like complex things at a young age. But the conversations I had with my boys, because I was so fearful, and it was my fear of myself and what I was and what they could, genetically, if that way, what they could have. I started having those light conversations around middle school, but they didn't get too in depth until freshman year for my older son, and now my younger one's in 7th grade. So it was staggered a little bit for them because of their age gap, but that is earlier in middle school, yes. But I don't think you can't talk to them about all the stuff I just talked about.
No.
But
like you said, I would teach it definitely, like I always said.
But I think that it's important because kids with the phones and stuff's happening younger and younger, it wasn't that common that kids in middle school were drinking when I was in high school, but it's becoming more common. So I think, it's important to start it then, but I think the freshman year is a good point for the heavier conversations, and then it needs to go. But it's not always don't do drugs, which you shouldn't, but which is DARE, which they do great work. They're trying, and at least people are putting effort into trying, but it's also somewhat, we have to understand how to recognize it. Hey, and I think I'm going to go back to what Taylor told me. It was really impactful when she said it. But it's all you think about. If you can't have fun without doing it, all right, whether you're 13 or 25, you have a problem. And to self-recognize that is very important. And at a young age, that's going to be hard. But Taylor was able to in her teen years, but her parents realized it many years before. These two realized my problems a decade before I cared about them, even though I could say I was going to do better, some of it is that you can't, whether you realize or not, you can't stop it. And you have to have the things in place to work through that and to figure it out.
Can I just add, and Ricky, I think you touched on this in your story, and to bring it to the kind of where a lot of you in this room are sitting as parents of 11th graders and 12th graders, and kind of thinking beyond, is empowering your student and your students in middle school with information. And that's what you can do as really reframing that as an educator and a coach. So when you were speaking with your son and he came to you, that openness that he came to you to share and to talk, to really impact, use that as a moment to empower him with the information that you had to share about you. You weren't sharing a no, you cannot, or the judgment piece, and that's hard to do.
It's very hard to do. And if I would have went, like I said, I demonized my wife. If I would have kept going that route, there's no way he would have came to me if I said, you do this, it's horrible. And that was for him. Every kid's different. I can't say what's perfect to say to your only you guys know what's right for your children, but like I said, it's different for my older one and my younger one. My younger one, I've talked to these two about it. He's a handful. He's a great kid and no issues so far, but he is a lot like me and it scares me. So those conversations will be different for him, and that's even in my own household.
Can I add, and this is really, I have an 8-year-old daughter, And I tell her, because I'm asked to speak at AA meetings, and I was on a podcast telling my story, and I just decided to be open with her to the amount that she could understand. She's 8 years old. And I say, I'm going to speak at a meeting and share my story to hopefully be helpful to somebody who struggles with what I struggle with, because mommy and daddy don't drink alcohol, because when I would drink, I would lose control. And I tell her that now. She can't fully conceptualize it, but I talk to her about it a little bit. And then as she gets into middle school, it's like a little bit more to what they can handle at that point. But that's really important to me, like what Ricky was saying, so that she could come to me. It's like, you might not have what I have. You know, my mom's been drunk twice in her life by accident. Like, I definitely got my dad's genetics. And so I want her to understand, like, this, you know, if you start drinking and this happens, you might have this. And also, people use alcohol for all sorts of reasons who are not even genetically alcoholics. And it's good to learn, like, this is not a medicine. This is not a solution.
I feel like these days many more high schoolers, thank goodness, have their own sort of individual counselors. When they go to college, I'm curious about the intersection of individual counselors, and particularly if a kid goes out of state.
Yep.
The intersection between college health services, mental health services, and individual therapists that they might come in with that they may or may not still be able to see.
Yep. Great question. We help students navigate that all the time. And so what I would recommend is really, right, and you're reaching out to get the information around that before that transition happens, but it can look different. It depends on the licensure of the clinician that they're seeing here or their home base and kind of what their goals are and that kind of thing. I would say many college institutions, almost all college institutions, have a counseling and mental health service that is accessible and that will often work with students to help them continue their care goals and then partner with the student and fill that in. So I would say the piece there is that the tricky part is sometimes students are like, oh, I'll figure it out when I get there, which is okay, and they can, but it's what kind of planning and can you do ahead of time. And then the parent piece looks very different because you may be used to helping your child make appointments, helping schedule with them, helping navigate insurance pieces and those kinds of things. I can blanketly say, like, there are supports around that, and again, to look at it like a learning opportunity. So using the time now to kind of frame it on, like, what might this look like for you a couple months from now, and looking ahead of time on kind of how they may care plan going forward. I would say just kind of the last piece for that is they don't have to do it alone. It's not just like, okay, it's up to you now to like find a counselor. There are lots of supports that will help with that. And I think I've seen most all college campuses really the needle on like the mental health conversation has moved in the last 5 years, especially like post-COVID, so far in the like proactive planning direction that I think there's some really great supports. And also too, outside of maybe your students not planning on enrolling in higher education in the fall, there are still like great community supports and planning pieces to help with that too.
So if you have a child going to college, and what are the parents' rights to communicate different things as far as, let's say, they've dealt with anxiety, they're now going out of state somewhere, as far as taking care of their needs, both medically, mentally, what does the parent have to do in order to maintain some control or rights to help their child when they're at college?
That's a great question, and one that came up in this space last year too, because it makes sense. It makes sense. It's something you and your student are probably so used to partnering together, and how might that look different moving forward? It's learning about what is FERPA, what is HIPAA, but to empower you as parents and friends and community members and that kind of thing, it's always welcome and okay to share information, about your student and your child. If you're concerned or if you have questions, I think parents sometimes are like, oh, now they're in college, I don't want to bother them, I don't want to or sometimes it goes the other way. But we welcome partnership with parents all the time. So we often will get phone calls to our office from parents sharing information of, you know what, I haven't heard from my student in a while and I'm worried about them, or I'm wondering how they're doing, or I just kind of have this feeling that they're not seeming like themselves. They were just home for the weekend and they're returning and they're really struggling. I want to make sure somebody knows. So the channel of communication from parent to school is open. What will look different is then the sharing that goes to you as a parent from the health side, from the academic side. That really goes through your student. So it's empowering your child then to be a partner with you and kind of what that looks like. So some conversations and expectation around them being in the driver's seat for that. If they're not used to, it's okay. It's going to take some practice. They don't, have to get it in that first semester. But that's a good thing. That's a growth moment for them. I hope that helps answer your question and comforts you that to share the information with school the door is open for that always. And then kind of the other, it'll feel a little hard to maybe not get it in the same way you're used to, but partnering with your student and kind of giving some moments for practice with that, maybe starting now. And like they'll hopefully get some direction on how to do that too.
We want to thank Kristen and Taylor, Ricky, Molly. The three of them are going to join us over at Winchester High School this afternoon, but feel free to connect with guidance, with anybody that can support you. And we want to thank the Coalition for a Safer Community. We really appreciate you guys, so thank you.